Let me introduce his panel. Michael Stoddard from Efficiency Maine Trust, who's leading our panel on the financing and the creation of public-private partnerships to roll out EV technology. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today, and the microphone is yours.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to everyone at NECBC for inviting us to participate. We are very pleased to see this discussion happening anywhere and any time, but especially with our friends from Quebec and New Hampshire and Vermont. It's great to be having this conversation. We're pretty deeply engaged in questions about how to structure our expansion of the EV charging network in this state. And so it's a great opportunity to hear what other people are thinking and doing. For those who don't know, Efficiency Maine is the independent administrator of all of the energy efficiency programs in the state of Maine, as well as a lot of programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we are tasked with investing and managing all of the utility funds for demand side management programs, as well as all of the RGGI funds that come to Maine for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we have been the organization that administered the VW settlement funds and are looking forward to administering funds coming out of the federal legislation that will be used for EV charging infrastructure. So we've got our hands full. We've been doing this since about 2018, and that started with the VW settlement funds we received at that time. When we started working with ChargePoint, who won the initial bid to install and operate a series of 7 DC fast charging stations. So I'm joined today by Dedrick Roper, who is the Public-Private Partnerships Director at ChargePoint, and he will be one of our panelists. And also by Bill Howell, who is the Strategic Initiatives Lead at Irving Oil. Irving won in a competitive solicitation held earlier last year. They won 4 out of the 7 locations. And so we're looking forward to having them play an increasing role in EV charging infrastructure in Maine. And then finally, I'm joined by my colleague, Amalia Siegel, who is the program manager for EV initiatives in Maine. And she's got some PowerPoint slides queued up that I hope she could run through right now to give you a quick introduction to what's going on in Maine with EV infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Michael. And great, here are the slides. So as Michael said, my name is Molly. I am the program manager for EV initiatives at Efficiency Maine. And I'm happy to share a brief description of where we are in Maine in regards to public electric vehicle charging and some lessons that we've learned through administering several rounds of competitive funding for charging in the state. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So the goals that we have for the deployment of public EV charging, one, to strengthen the Maine economy by reducing drivers' energy costs, promoting tourism, of course, from neighboring provinces and states, and then to advance Maine's progress toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. And then some of the objectives that we have towards those goals. Number one is to facilitate market transformation towards electric vehicles. We have a rebate program for EVs, which Efficiency Maine administers. So that's an important part of it. And then, of course, the charging side is very important as well. We have an objective to expand the network of DC fast chargers for those certain situations where DC fast charging is the best solution. And we also focus on level 2 chargers where they're appropriate for extended charging. We focus on assuring equitable access to EV charging. That includes both geographic equity as well as income and economic equity. So we focus on those different aspects of equity in all of our program design. And then to attract and complement funding from various different sources, whether it's federal, private funding, or other sources. Next slide, please. And then specifically looking at the DC fast charging network, some of the targets that we have are to focus on serving drivers who require that fast charging, where they really need a quick charge and not the longer duration level 2 charging. to really enable EV travel from all corners of the state, north to south and east to west, across all of the major thoroughfares and to and from our neighboring states and provinces, to deliver a positive customer experience at these charging stations, to have a target distance between chargers of 50 miles or less, and then to encourage sustainable operations through the appropriate use of competitive bidding, market solutions, of course, public-private partnerships, and public funding sources. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of where we are in Maine in regards to public charging. So of the initiatives that Efficiency Maine has funded, we started with the VW funds, and through that we were able to install 14 DC fast charging plugs. And then in the past year, we've awarded 14 more plugs, which are under construction at the moment. And with some remaining funds that we have from the NECEC settlement, we'll be installing around 10 more plugs, DC fast charging plugs, towards in the northern part of the state, going up towards Canada. For level 2 charging, we've awarded 156 plugs at public locations, municipalities, workplaces, state agencies, and multi-unit dwellings. Some other sources of funding for EV chargers so far, we had a grant from the Maine Public Utilities Commission where we funded 50 level 2 plugs, and Central Maine Power was also part of that, and they were able to install 60 level 2 plugs at public locations. And then the rest of these points that you see on the map that were not funded through our initiatives are funded through private investment. So whether it's Tesla, Electrify America has some DC fast charging plugs in the state, and then independently funded, whether it's businesses, workplaces. There were some grants through CMP and Avangrid Foundation. So that's what you see on the right. That's the entire public charging network, not just those that have been publicly funded. So it is getting built out. It's getting better every year. And we really hope to be filling in this map quite a bit more in the next couple of years. Next slide, please. Just a little discussion of our future plans for EV charging in the state. We have laid out by fiscal year what we hope to accomplish in the different regions that we hope to reach specifically with fast charging. So as I mentioned, for the next year, during 2022, we hope to award funds to install fast chargers in Aroostook County in the far north, and also in Washington County, and that will allow drivers to travel from north and south and over to the eastern border, which currently is very difficult given the lack of public charging infrastructure in those areas. So we're really focused, number one, on gap filling on these key corridors that will allow people to cross the state. And then in subsequent years, we have plans to come back to some of the more populated areas and fill in charging there. And then we also have some other significant gaps on Maine's highway network that we will need to fill with fast chargers in order to achieve that goal of 50 miles or less between charging stations. We also have a focus on trying to serve the needs of people who don't have access to charging overnight. So whether that's people living in multifamily dwellings or more low and moderate income folks who don't have access to home charging, that is going to be a priority. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share a little bit about what we have learned through the rounds of competitive funding that we have done. There are different types of public and private partnerships that we have contemplated or that we have experience with. So as Michael mentioned, in phase 1, ChargePoint was a single charging service provider that put out a bid and was awarded to own and operate all 7 charging sites in that round. So that is one model. Another model was more of what happened in this latest phase, which we called phase 3, which is where we received bids from a variety of different business owners, property owners, or installers and third parties to operate these chargers. So for instance, a convenience store owner who would like to see charging come to their business in order to attract more customers to their convenience store. That's one example of a public-private partnership. Next, an installer or another third party who put out a bid to own and operate these chargers. So Revision Energy is an example of someone who will be operating chargers through phase 3. And then some other models that we have contemplated but have not been put in place yet is the idea of working with other public entities. So whether it's a university or a municipality or possibly a governmental agency to install chargers on those properties rather than at a private business. And we can talk about this later about when this might be an appropriate use of public funds, but we do think it's important to have these different strategies in our pocket as we look at achieving geographic diversity in our very rural state. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just a couple of the considerations that we find have been important in building these public-private partnerships. So of course, considering who's responsible for the long-term maintenance and operation of the chargers. Obviously, Efficiency Maine or whatever governmental agency is administering these funds has an interest in keeping these chargers operational for the long term, but sometimes it makes more sense for another entity to be the one that's really responsible for that. So figuring out what those contractual arrangements look like. Of course, a concern in rural areas especially is how likely is the host site to be able to recover operating costs, especially demand charges. So I'm really looking at what those economics look like and what is that host site going to need in order to make this station be really feasible. And then of course, looking at which locations are seeing investment from the private sector. We don't want to block out the private sector. We want to make sure that if they are planning to invest in these sites that they have the opportunity to do so. I think that's the last slide, and I'd like to turn it back to Michael and the next panelist.
Thank you, Molly. Let's keep moving it along. Why don't we go to Bill Howell next, our colleague from Irving Oil, who has worked with us over the last few months on getting prepared for their next set of EV chargers in Maine. And Bill, if you are close by, please turn on your camera and give us a little overview of things from your perspective, and then we'll go to Dedrick next.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Hopefully folks can see and hear me okay.
Yes.
Great. Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate this morning, Michael, and the New England Canada Business Council as well. We appreciate being part of this. I've been with Irving since about 2008. Most of that time, I have been involved in our retail business and our C-store operations, most recently responsible for our New England network. Our company has recently put together a team that's strictly focused on alternative energy. And I've been fortunate to be able to join that team. And my current focus now is really leading our long-term strategy for alternative fuels, including electric vehicle charging, both in North America and in Ireland, where we have some locations and a business in Ireland as well. Irving, as a company, we've been providing services and good energy to travelers across the Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and New England region for almost 100 years. We started in 1924 with one location. And really, we've expanded from that one location, again, to New England, to Ireland. We see unique aspects when it comes to the pressures of climate change and energy transition in each of the various regions where we do business, and we're learning from each region where we do business. Our operations in Quebec, as we heard earlier, have various pressures, as do our operations overseas in the European Union. So we're actively working with, learning from the partners in those various regions, and then trying to consolidate that information and really bringing forward the best customer offer and the best customer solutions possible, because for a business, it really comes back to how do we meet the needs of those customers. On a broader scale, just to hit on some of the things that our company is doing or looking at as part of the overall energy transition. At a very high level, we are working with partners at TC Energy in New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada to really explore joint development of a series of new energy projects that are really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as creating new economic opportunities in the New Brunswick and Atlantic Canada region. On a smaller scale, we've started adding solar panels to the retail canopies at some of our locations, really as a pilot to see how much energy we can offset. We worked with Revision Energy, who I know is here today as well, on a site that we just installed in Massachusetts a week or two ago, as well as we have solar panels on now in one of our canopies in St. John, New Brunswick as well. So interested to see how that plays out, and looking forward to being able to expand those offers. On an even smaller scale, several years ago, we eliminated, as well as others, we eliminated plastic straws at our restaurants throughout our network, as an impact of eliminating almost 2 million straws a year from landfills and others. We're expanding biofuels capabilities. And then really what we're talking about here today is what we're doing in the EV charging space. So when it comes to EV charging, as a company, like we're on a continuous journey to work on our environmental footprint, again, with a customer focus. So EV charging is an important part of this journey, and we're going to continue to find ways to provide the goods and services that the customers need. So within the EV charging space, we're already moving, and we're connecting the communities. In Atlantic Canada, we're a leading fast charging host already. We're actively, as Molly and Michael mentioned, we're actively working with Efficiency Maine on 4 locations in the state of Maine. Those will be under development this year. We have a site in Providence, Rhode Island that's currently under construction as well. We worked with a program in Rhode Island for funding and assistance with that. So currently within our network in Atlantic Canada, Quebec, and New England, we currently have 28 locations that do have EV fast charging available. And we have active plans for an additional 15 to 20 sites, I would say, in the next 18 months, roughly, depending on ordering timeframes and others. And we're continuing to build that plan out as we go. We talked about corridors. I know Molly showed the map of Maine, and really the importance of linking regions and finding corridors. And that's our initial focus, is really along some of those key corridors in the regions that we operate. So again, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, and the New England region. Really initially focusing on locations that have the amenities that travelers need. If they're going to be stopping, if you're driving your EV and you're going to be stopping for 15 to 30 minutes, roughly, depending on how much power you require. We're looking at our locations that have food service, that have larger stores. Safety is always critical. So we really want to make sure that there is a well-lit, safe parking area, safe location on the lot, so people can feel at ease when they're sitting in their car or going inside the store. Of course, clean bathrooms. And then even at some of our locations, one of the sites in Maine that we are excited to move forward with is our Travel Plaza in Newport, Maine. And that site even has what we call a bark park. So there is a fenced in area out front. So our 4-legged friends can take a break as well, while their human goes and charges their vehicle and purchases some treats. So we believe that we're uniquely positioned to offer cross-border EV corridors as well, based on our retail footprint and the regions that we operate in North America. So really our goal is to be able to link anywhere from Halifax, Nova Scotia, through Montreal, through Boston, and the regions in between over time, and working with entities such as Efficiency Maine, such as NRCan, such as the state of New Hampshire, to help facilitate that. We also know that, and Molly hit on this as well, not all EV drivers are going to require fast charging. There's going to be a place for fast charging as people are going on longer distance, farther away from home. But really, as part of our long-term EV strategy, we also envision and will be working with municipalities on the potential development of level 2 charging, on developers of multi-unit dwellings or places like the city of Portland, on how we can help facilitate slow charging or level 2 charging for some of those areas. And then longer term, even on home charging opportunities and how we can help play a role in that, help facilitate home charging opportunities. Really, and we greatly appreciate being part of this and being able to work on some of these public-private partnerships, because while the customer demand is coming, we recognize that it is still relatively early days in adoption, and it's going to take some time. And these funds, these partnerships, and working with folks like Michael and Molly is an important way to help facilitate this infrastructure and building out these corridors. So again, thank you very much for having us be a part of this conversation, and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you as well for participating. It certainly enriches the discussion, because we think you, as you have described, will play a really important role in these public-private partnerships as we try to jumpstart this transition. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dedrick Roper from ChargePoint today, and I especially want to thank him for getting up very early because he's in the Pacific time zone, if I'm not mistaken. And so to see a smile on his face is a treat, because if I were in his shoes, I'm not sure I would be looking quite so cheerful. But anyway, Dedrick, thank you for joining us, and please introduce yourself and your company and tell us a little bit about your perspectives on the topic of this panel.
Awesome. Thank you for the warm welcome, Michael. I am really, really excited. I think, I live in public-private partnerships, and when I think about, what good comes out of those, this event, this collaboration cross-border really speaks to that. And also, just want to speak, piggyback on what Bill was saying, how Irving Oil has leveraged public-private partnerships to deploy their initial stations, begin to learn, and now look at new deployments. It's really that network effect that I've seen over the years by working through these kinds of opportunities. So as Michael said, I'm Dedrick Roper, Director of Public-Private Partnerships at ChargePoint. I've been with the company since 2015. ChargePoint was founded in 2007. We're currently at about 1,300 employees worldwide, with operations in both North America and Europe. And we manufacture charging hardware for single-family residential, multifamily, commercial, which you would see in the public setting, and fleet. We offer these to purchase to site hosts, and we provide a software subscription that enables them to customize their offering in the way that they want. So, from a multifamily property owner, it could be providing as an amenity to your residence, or in the case of a convenience store or gas station, selling it and trying to earn some revenue off the sale of electrons. For businesses that don't necessarily want to incur a bunch of upfront capital costs, we offer what's known as ChargePoint as a service, which is a subscription service and rolls those payments into an annual fee. ChargePoint's been hyper-focused on driver experience. We have a top-rated app in both the Apple App Store and Android. And we are currently at over 125,000 ChargePoint ports, plus an additional 200,000 that are accessible via roaming. And for folks that don't know what roaming is, roaming enables a driver to use whatever account they want, Flow, EVgo, Electrify America, and charge on another charging station networks without any inconveniences, any extra fees, et cetera. So when you're talking about cross-border collaboration and making sure that infrastructure works well together, the industry is working on that from the roaming perspective. In March will be our 1-year anniversary of being a public company, so trading on the New York Stock Exchange. So that's a little bit about ChargePoint. I am the Director of Public-Private Partnerships, and they're near and dear to my heart. So I just want to touch on kind of the top bullet points the top benefits from public-private partnerships. First of all, they facilitate collaboration. You know, this discussion here, there's discussions like this in, community meetings, you know, with Efficiency Maine, et cetera, really gets the discussion going, gets the media involved. When you have a nice ribbon cutting event, you can get those folks out there, you know, sort of amplifying that message, really instilling driver confidence in the community. Hey, they see it on TV, there's a charging station here. It really helps. Public-private partnerships attract investment to underserved communities, rural communities. So, you know, locations that would not make economic sense from day one, having a subsidy from the government, leveraging cost share from the private sector, getting the community involved. There's other things that need to happen besides just installing a charging station. You got to have signage. These need to be well visible. They need to be amplified. There's a lot that the local community can do, and these partnerships bring all that together. Develop solutions to complex problems. A lot of the grants that we've worked on, early multifamily grants in 2014, there's a lot of learnings that come out of that feed directly into product, feed directly into business and the way you approach different verticals. And then obviously they help identify barriers and best practice dissemination. Our grant with Efficiency Maine, we're reporting on a monthly basis how construction is going. Then we're doing quarterly reports on uptime and, you know, how much drivers are paying for charging, even sharing some of our utility costs. There's a lot of learnings that come out of that and influence, you know, both, your funding agencies, programs, but also our business. And then, you know, spurs new business models, businesses and business models. So, ChargePoint, the way we approached grants early on was, you know, we'd apply, you know, we'd lead, we'd do everything kind of our first phase in Maine. But really, we want to turn the script and we want to get as many Irving oils involved as possible, because that's the only way we're going to build this network out. So again, thanks for having me and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Dedrick. I have some questions to follow up that I'm interested in asking, but I also want to invite folks in the audience who might have questions to do so. Peter, I think I'm going to have to rely on you or Susan to tell us where those questions would come from. I hope one of you will just chime in and blurt in if there's a question you want to bring to the panelists. But perhaps we can start with one that I had. Dedrick, going back to you while I've got you up on the screen, can you talk about some of the different approaches? You know, you talked about some of the learnings that you have, and I had a conversation with actually somebody from the Circle K organization, which, like Bill's organization, has a lot of convenience stores along the roadways, and they're very engaged in adding charging stations. And he told us that in Norway now, they're getting to a point where the private sector is just investing in these because the volume of traffic of EVs has grown to a level where they can recover their costs and they don't really need much public input. I'm clearly, we're not there right now. I can say that for sure in Maine, but I'm wondering what you think is the pathway. Like, what are your learnings in terms of the public role? How much and what guardrails do you think make sense so that we are moving in the direction of something that eventually grows into a private sector, market-driven, sustainable situation?
Yeah, I mean, I say we have a lot of tailwinds. I think, kind of an overlooked component of, slower EV adoption has been the lack of vehicle availability. Many of the cars did not work for everyone. Now we have multiple pickup trucks coming out, some with vehicle to grid capabilities, at a low price point. So that's one component. Obviously, the significant level of investment is going to attract, significant level of investment from federal government, natural resources, Canada, utilities, et cetera, will continue to help build out the network. And with that scale, I think, in the next couple of years, we're going to see, a lot more dots on the map, so to speak, just thanks to a lot of these market forces and vehicle availability.
Thank you. Peter, you had a question. Can I ask you to come off mic and ask your question?
I really, for you and Molly, but possibly for all four of you, just would love to have you take us under the hood, wretched pun intended, on a little more on the process of filling out that map. I'm sure there's a lot of folks, particularly from Quebec and New Brunswick, who are very happy to see places you're going to be filling in gaps in the charging network sooner rather than later. But I wonder if you could say more, potentially, tips and tricks, lessons you've learned about how you go about most intelligently and effectively filling in that map of charging locations. I get it that some of it is every 50 miles, but also how much can you respond to market data and seeing what's getting used the most heavily, or other indicators that there's demand for more charging in these places?
Maybe I can start with an answer, since I think I'm the one who's been here from the beginning and have seen it evolve in Maine. But I suspect that for our friends in Vermont and New Hampshire, they will have experienced a similar thing, which is we have a lot of rural areas and there's just some limited choices. When you zoom in on Google Maps and start to make your way up along some of the major corridors, and you need 3-phase power for fast charging, there's just limits. And all these other things that you heard Bill and Dedrick and Molly say are the priorities or some of the criteria that we're looking for. We're looking for convenience, a good customer experience. You want them to be able to go get a cup of coffee or have a place to walk their dog. You want there to be good lighting so they feel safe. In rural parts of the state, this just is not around every single corner. So it does somewhat help focus your thinking, I think, when you come to these towns. So what we did was we started with a real core foundation in Maine. We said we need to get a couple of pins on the map in some critical spots to start linking us to our focus at that time was Quebec, because we know that Quebec has a very large fleet of EVs, much larger than any other jurisdiction around us. And also they're an important tourist source of tourism in Maine. And so we wanted to, just like Mary Claude was saying, we wanted to forge that link. So we started on the routes that connect there, and we designated those routes, but then we made it open to a competitive process. We said, these are the routes that are our priorities, and you come up with the bids. You bidders come to us with your suggestions and tell us why your place is the best. And we made traffic counts one of the criteria in the scoring that we would use. And we made all those other criteria that I just listed off scoring elements of our scoring, and we awarded the ones to the places that we thought would be the best fit. One of the scoring criteria was distance or proximity to the next closest DC fast charger. So if it was too close to the other one, that was going to get a lower score. If it was too far from the next closest one, that was going to get a lower score. So we were trying to come up with a scoring system that would create this Goldilocks kind of situation where we could get the spacing right and get good locations. I think as these new federal funds have come forward, it's going to give us a lot more latitude to be more flexible and have charging stations that are closer to each other. But when we got that first tranche of VW money, it was very limited. So we were very picky and pretty prescriptive about where we were seeking for those stations. But I'll let Dedrick and Bill maybe say a word just to chime in on that.
Yeah, just to piggyback off, what Michael said. What I think Efficiency Maine did well was take an iterative approach, right? Like Michael said, there was this initial network of 7 core sites that needed to be developed, but then the next solicitation incorporated lessons learned from the first project to overcome some of those barriers in the rural communities, enabling individual site hosts to apply, supporting with demand charges, et cetera. So, as decision makers are starting to contemplate these build outs, I really encourage sort of an iterative approach, come back each year, review what you've learned, and then modify your program going forward.
Bill, anything to add?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, again, with the regions that we operate, when we look at the map, our first step in the process is really to focus on those key highway corridors. Whether it's looking at 50 miles in between each charging location or whatever those parameters are, we can map out along the highway where those sites are. For us, it tends to gravitate towards some of our larger truck stop / travel plaza locations as a starting point. Again, they have larger properties that's easier to locate DC fast charging and also easier to future proof. So we don't necessarily want to try and shoehorn something into a site that can only ever have 2 chargers because it's a really tight parking lot. We understand this will grow over time, so we want to be able to approach it with a potentially a larger property that can grow over time as demand does. Again, those locations, to Michael's point, when it comes to power requirements, those locations tend to have utilities and utility connections that are more suited to something like this out of the gates. So we really look at our overall network. We've gone through this exercise and we rank sites on a 1 through 4 basis, 1 being the highest priority and the best fit, and 4 being something that's probably not going to work for a variety of reasons. And then you take that and you start overlaying other dynamics as far as potential development costs, potential costs of utility connections, proximity to electric lines, et cetera, and can start honing in and getting those priority sites. So we've gone through that exercise. We have our network relatively mapped out. There's always going to be evolution in that as we go, but we feel good about our planning process, and it's very helpful to be able to have conversations like this, to be able to build relationships with folks like Michael and Molly, and understand use Maine as the example, from a Maine perspective, the map that Molly showed and the plan for their future on the corridors or regions that the state of Maine is looking at, because then that allows a business to work that into our longer term planning cycle as well, from a capital need and a capital requirement perspective. So then we can work in tandem with these agencies and really bring this forward.
Thanks, Bill. I see that there's a question from one of the attendees. I think Bill Luthern has a question and has been promoted.
Yes, am I plugged in here?
We can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, a couple of questions. First, in building out, an infrastructure the scale that you're all proposing, I think a certain amount of standardization is needed for both safety, reliability, and such. An example, but probably not a good example, is that you don't want to pull up to one of these stations and realize that you need a 3-prong to a 2-prong type of adapter in order to charge your vehicle. So are there agencies such as the American Society of Mechanical Engineers or whoever that are working on standards for the installation and operation of these charging stations? And my second question is regarding utility rates, and what trends, if any, are you seeing in the development of utility rates for providing electricity to these stations?
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to put the first part of the question to Dedrick. I think probably in the best position to answer that technical question.
Yes, yeah, the answer is yes. There are standards bodies that are working on, EV requirements. We have standard connectors today. So Bill, the issue you raised about arriving at a charging station, not be able to charge, has been mitigated. That is true for all vehicles, including Tesla. Tesla uses a proprietary connector, but there are adapters available for those drivers to be able to plug into a standard charging station.
And I'll just add that when we put out our request for proposals for bids, we're pretty prescriptive about the minimum standards that we will accept, whether it's in terms of capacity for fast charging, numbers of units, plug interoperability, universal payment systems, et cetera. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that. I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. So let's go to Sam Evans-Brown if we have time.
Hey all, this is just a question for the folks in Maine, because we in New Hampshire are dealing with this very issue. When it comes to these really low utilization sites, demand charges can absolutely murder the economics of having public charging. And I'm just curious how Maine has approached that challenge, because of course, if you allow sites to have a different demand charge structure, then there might be complaints of subsidization, and consumer advocates can get exercised about that.
Yeah, it's an ongoing debate in our various policy circles here and at the Public Utilities Commission about whether there should be a rate design that simply forgives rates, demand charge rates to those fast charging locations, either permanently or for some holiday period of years until the level of EV traffic volume picks up. What we've done until any of those decisions get made, and none have been made as yet, we've just subsidized it through the Efficiency Maine funds that we have. So we didn't do this for the first round, but for the second round, the one that Bill's company participated in, we established a demand charge incentive in which we agreed to reimburse the host site 100% of their demand charges in year one, 80% in year two, 60% in year three, 40% in year four, and 20% in year five. So we think that buys them 5 years of time to wait for the market to catch up and create enough volume. In the really, really remote areas, we may have to try something different. I don't know how that's going to work out, but that's what we've come up with so far, and we'll see how it goes. And I think that brings us right to time, Peter. So if you want to be able to say that Efficiency Maine was on time and under budget, I think I should quit right now.
Woo-hoo! Thank you.
And thanks to all the panelists. Great job, guys.